Greetings and peace. This is Dr. Laurence Brown with another episode of Interfaith Issues, where we discuss the issues of common interest to the three Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Today I'm going to be talking about the subject of where is the Christ in Christianity. Now that title might strike people as a little unusual if they have not been introduced to the concept before. The reason for the title, Where is the Christ in Christianity, is simply that many who read the Christian scriptures encounter a paradox that they have difficulty resolving. And that paradox is that the teachings of Jesus Christ often are found to be seemingly at odds with the tenets of Christian. Hence the question, where is the Christ in Christianity? On one hand, we have a religion that is named after Jesus Christ. And if you ask any Christian, what is the foundation of your faith? What does it mean to be Christian? They will say it means to follow the teachings and the example of Jesus Christ. But now, if that is the case, why do we find such a large disparity between what Jesus Christ teaches and what the church teaches as the tenets of Trinitarian Christian faith? Let me give you some examples. Jesus Christ taught Old Testament law. That's why, as I said in the beginning of this talk, he's known as Rabbi Jesus. Paul negated it. Jesus Christ taught that God is one God. The Pauline theologians derived the Trinity. Jesus called himself the Son of Man 88 times. 88 times he called himself the Son of Man. Not once did he ever call himself the Son of God in a literal, begotten, not made sense. What did Paul call Jesus Christ? The Son of God. What do Christians know Jesus Christ as now? Allegedly the Son of God. We have to ask ourselves, when we are following the tenets of Christian faith, or those who follow the tenets of Christian faith, what are they adhering to more closely, the teachings of Jesus Christ or the teachings of Paul? And make no mistake about it, they are not the same. The teachings of Paul, as I just stated, in most cases are contradictory to the teachings of Jesus Christ, negating the Old Testament law, denying the unity of God, denying the direct accountability, meaning praying directly to God instead of praying to a saint or an intercessor, identifying Jesus Christ as a man and not as the Son of God. These are critical points upon which Paul and Jesus Christ were at odds. Paul was not only at odds with the teachings of Jesus Christ, but he was corrected by Jesus' disciples. It is well documented in the New Testament, the animosity between Peter and Paul, the animosity between James and Paul. So again, the title of this talk, Where is the Christ in Christianity? Because what we are finding is that what Jesus Christ taught is not the foundation of the tenets of faith encountered in Trinitarian churches of this time. Rather, the Trinitarian churches of this time are based predominantly upon the teachings of Paul. How recognizable is this? Is this something that I am seeing for the first time nobody else has seen? Is this something that has escaped the knowledge of Christian scholars? Not at all. They are well aware of it, but they are shy to talk about it. Let me read some quotes. Lehman contributes, quote, "What Paul proclaimed as Christianity was sheer heresy, which could not be based on the Jewish or Essene faith, or on the teaching of Rabbi Jesus. But, as Schoenfeld says, the Pauline heresy became the foundation of Christian orthodoxy, and the legitimate church was disowned as heretical." Was this only to be found in the writings of Lehman? No. Barty Ehrman, probably the leading scholar of biblical textual criticism alive today, speaking upon this very subject, commented, quote, "Paul's view was not universally accepted, or, one might argue, even widely accepted. Even more striking, Paul's own letters indicate that there were outspoken, sincere, and active Christian leaders who vehemently disagreed with him on this score and considered Paul's views to be a corruption of the true message of Christ. One should always bear in mind that in this very letter of Galatians, Paul indicates that he confronted Peter over just such issues. He disagreed, that is, even with Jesus' closest disciple. Commenting on some of the early Christians in the pseudo-Clementine literature, Bart D. Ehrman wrote, Paul has corrupted the true faith on a brief vision, which he has doubtless misconstrued. Paul is thus the enemy of the apostles, not the chief of them. He is outside the true faith, a heretic to be banned, not an apostle to be followed. Joel Carmichael, quote, "We are a universe away from Jesus. If Jesus came only to fulfill the law and the prophets, if he thought that not one iota, not a dot would pass from the law, that the cardinal commandment was, quote, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one,' and that no one was good but God, what would he have thought of Paul's handiwork? Paul's triumph meant the final obliteration of the historic Jesus." There are many others who have made similar comments. The point is that in analyzing Christianity, we have to choose who to take the teachings from. If we are choosing to take our teachings from the prophet Jesus, let's do it. Let's take from his teachings. Let's go and buy a red letter Bible that records all the words of Jesus Christ in red, and we will find everything that Jesus said very clear. You will find everything that I have spoken about in this last 20 minutes. You will find him speaking of one God. You will find him speaking of himself as the Son of Man. You will find him speaking of direct accountability. You will find him speaking of the fact that he was an ethnic prophet, etc., etc. But if you choose to follow the teachings of Paul, well, then you are welcome to follow the Pauline, Trinitarian Christianity that prevails in this time. But before you do that, I would suggest one thing. Let's take a close look at these issues I have described. Jesus Christ teaching that there is only one God, teaching that the prophets were men and sons of men, teaching direct accountability. What other religion, what other of the Abrahamic religions conveys these simple, true values? If you answered Islam, you'd be correct. Here is a religion that honors Jesus Christ as the prophet, that recognizes his humanity, recognizes the truth of the revelation that he conveyed, but at the same time recognizes the very human corruptions, whether intentional or not, that crept into that revelation over time. At the same time, Islam is a religion of Tawheed, belief in the oneness of God, as Jesus professed, and it is a religion that fulfills everything that Jesus Christ himself spoke of. We have discussed the fact that in appearance, Jesus Christ was known to have been bearded. His mother, Mary, was known to have covered. Examples that we find better exemplified in the Muslim community than in the Christian community. In addition, they both dressed with modesty, and they exemplified the manners of humility, sincerity, and kindness. In addition, Jesus Christ taught his followers the greeting of peace, and then set the example for them. 4 times in the Bible, he gave his disciples this greeting, and this established this practice as one of the manners of Christianity. But again, this is a manner that we find better exemplified among the Muslims, who greet one another with the greeting of peace, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam, peace be upon you, and upon you be peace. Now this is a discussion of appearance, and after that, manners. But now let's talk about something more serious. Let's talk about religious practices. To begin with, it may seem like a small point, but it was very major at the time that Jesus Christ was circumcised. This was part of the Abrahamic covenant. It was an important religious ritual. Paul, on the other hand, negated it. As a result, we find many Christians in this time following the example of Paul, or following the teachings of Paul, rather than following the example and teachings of their own prophet, Jesus Christ. Whereas we find this tradition maintained to this day among Muslims. In a similar fashion, Jesus Christ was known as Rabbi Jesus. He was an Orthodox Jew. He lived and practiced and taught the law of that time, Mosaic law. He did not eat pork. Who follows that example in this time, if not the Muslims? Pork is very prevalent in Christian societies to the point where nobody even thinks about its prohibition anymore. Jesus Christ did not take or give usury. Interest was forbidden. And everybody knows the story of Jesus Christ having overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. Whether this was related to usury or not, we cannot say. But what we can say is that usury was one of the greatest sins of the time of Jesus Christ. And yet we now find Christian societies based upon usury. We find everybody so dependent upon taking and giving interest in their monetary dealings that they practically cannot live without it. Whereas on the other hand, we find Muslim societies functioning on the level of Islamic banking, and we find interest is not an element of Muslim financial dealings. Let's take another example. Extramarital contact with women. Jesus Christ was a man of modesty. He did not have any recorded extramarital contact with women. Possibly there may have been contact, we may speculate, in the process of delivering sacraments or healing. However, there is no clear documentation of any extramarital contact. How do we compare that with what we see in modern-day societies, where in Christian countries, extramarital contact between the sexes has become the norm rather than the exception? Again, in Islamic societies, you do not find this to be the case. You find Muslims living in a manner that is more compatible with the example of Jesus Christ. With each section that I'm discussing here, I'm getting deeper into the more important points. We started with appearance, then manners. We started talking about religious practices. Now let's talk about practices of worship, an even more important issue. It is recorded that Jesus Christ was an Orthodox Jew. In accordance with the practices of his time, he made ablution as part of worship. Read in Exodus 40:31 through 32, where Moses and Aaron made ablution. This was the practice of the righteous of the time. A practice, again, that has not been maintained, but is to be found among the Muslims, in the Islamic community. Jesus Christ prayed in prostration. Read the whole Bible. Read the whole Bible and look for any passage that describes the manner of prayer, the manner in which Jesus Christ prayed. The only description you will find is when Jesus Christ went into the Garden of Gethsemane and fell on his face in prayer. Prostration. Prostration described for Jesus Christ in the same way that it was described in the Old Testament for the Old Testament patriarchs and prophets. Jesus Christ fasted for more than a month at a time, again, following the example of the righteous before him. And he made pilgrimage for the purpose of worship. Pilgrimage in his time, having been to Jerusalem. Now, we have just gone down a list of some of the greatest integrals of worship. Ibadah in Arabic, worship in English, ablution before prayer, purifying yourself before praying, fasting, and pilgrimage. Again, where do we find these examples better maintained among the followers, among the Christian community, or among the Muslims who make ablution before prayer, who pray in prostration, who fast the month of Ramadan, 1 month every year, and who make pilgrimage to Mecca as an article of worship? Now, everything that I have mentioned is important, but what I'm going to mention now is most important, and that is the matters of creed. Jesus Christ taught Tawheed, Tawheed being the oneness of God. 3 times in the New Testament he was asked about the greatest commandment, and he replied, "Know, O Israel, thy God is one." We find that in Matthew, we find it again in Mark, we find it again in Luke. This is a teaching taken directly from the first commandment. And yet, once again, where do we find the oneness of God best maintained in religious creed? Among Trinitarian Christians or among Muslims who adhere to a belief in God as one God without compromise, without partners, without division? Similarly, Jesus Christ declared himself in multiple passages to be a man and a prophet. 88 times he called himself the Son of Man. Nowhere did he call himself the Son of God in a literal, begotten, not made sense. And if you doubt that claim, you have only to read my books for the evidence, for the scriptural passages, and for the refutations. Or stay tuned, because we expect to cover this in another episode. However, the fact of the matter is, if you are reading the scriptures from the Greek, not from the translation, and this is very important, but from the Greek, you will find that Jesus Christ called himself the Son of Man 88 times, never called himself the Son of God in a literal, begotten, not made sense. Similarly, he called himself a prophet and never deified himself. Once again, where do we find the religion that respects Jesus Christ as what he claimed to be, a man and a prophet of God, if not in the religion of Islam? What I have presented here are a number of articles, pretty much the most important articles that we associate with the prophet Jesus Christ, posed the question, who exemplifies these teachings, these manners, this appearance, and most importantly, the creed that he taught? Who exemplifies these values better? The Christians who profess to follow the example and teachings of Jesus Christ, or the Muslims who also profess to follow the teachings and example of all of the prophets, Jesus Christ included? If you want to learn more about this, expand your knowledge on the subject, please go to my website, www.leveltruth.com. Look at the first of my series of books, Misguided, and you can carry it further from there. For now, this is Dr. Brown concluding this issue of Interfaith Issues, and looking forward to the next time we meet on this channel. Peace, and thank you for sharing this time with me.
I feel the peace, inside of me, a complete tranquility. I remember Allah, He remembers me. Feel the peace feel the breeze. Fresh, pure, holy peace. Peace in you, peace in me, peace for everybody. Fresh, pure.